A billionaire thought he knew everything about life until a simple act of kindness from a waitress taught him the lessons money could never buy. The billionaire dad, Richard, had always lived a life filled with luxury, wealth, and endless work. His days were tightly packed with meetings, business deals, and phone calls, leaving him very little time to actually enjoy life. Richard had everything money could buy: cars that cost more than most houses, a mansion in the hills with rooms he didn't even know existed, and vacations planned months in advance. But despite all his riches, there was something missing in his life. He had a son, Ethan, a bright, curious 7-year-old boy, and Richard realized he barely knew him. Their time together had always been rushed, quick breakfasts before school, short conversations at dinner, and weekend outings that were more about showing off than connecting. One morning, Richard woke up early and looked at Ethan, who was still half asleep in his big bed, tangled in his superhero pajamas. He felt a sudden pang of guilt. He wanted something different for today. He wanted to do something ordinary, something normal, something that would allow him to see the world through Ethan's eyes for just a little while. He didn't want another day spent behind a desk or in meetings. He wanted a day where he could simply be a father, not a billionaire. Richard suggested breakfast at a small diner in town. Ethan's eyes lit up immediately. He had never been to a place like that before. The diner wasn't fancy or modern. It didn't have shiny chrome furniture or marble tables. Instead, it had checkered floors, wooden booths with faded red cushions, and a bell above the door that jingled every time someone came in. The walls were decorated with old photographs, some yellowed with age, of families and community events. It smelled warm and inviting, a mixture of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and sweet pastries. As they entered, the waitress behind the counter greeted them with a friendly smile. Her name was Maria, and she moved with a calm confidence, carrying plates and taking orders as if she had been doing it all her life. She looked at Ethan and immediately knelt down to his level, asking him what he would like to eat. Richard noticed this interaction but didn't say anything. He was watching, silently curious. As Ethan started chatting with Maria as though they were old friends, Ethan decided on pancakes with chocolate chips, insisting that Maria make them extra fluffy. Richard tried to guide him to something healthier, but Ethan's excitement was impossible to resist. As they sat down in a small booth near the window, Richard felt a strange sensation, a mix of nervousness and curiosity. He had always lived in a world where everything was planned and controlled, but here, in this simple diner, things felt different. There were no expensive menus, no servers bowing in designer uniforms, no background music carefully selected for mood. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. It was fascinating. While waiting for their food, Ethan began exploring the diner. He peeked into the kitchen, where Maria and her assistant were busy cooking, waved at other diners, and even pointed at a small jukebox in the corner that seemed almost forgotten. Richard watched him carefully, noticing how free and joyful his son was in this environment. Ethan's laughter echoed softly in the diner, and Richard realized he hadn't heard his son laugh like that in a long time. It was a laugh untouched by luxury, untouched by wealth, untouched by rules. The other diners glanced at Ethan with smiles. One older man sitting at the counter waved at him, and Ethan waved back eagerly. A couple in a nearby booth chuckled as Ethan mimicked the way the waitress carried the plates. Richard felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite name. Was it pride, humility, or maybe a mixture of both? He had grown up surrounded by money and power, and yet, in this simple diner filled with ordinary people, he felt like an outsider, someone who didn't fully belong. When their food arrived, Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of the pancakes. He eagerly dug in, smearing chocolate chips across his face, not caring about manners or presentation. Richard chuckled quietly, feeling warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He realized he had been so busy chasing success that he had forgotten how small joys could bring immense happiness. Watching his son enjoy something as simple as pancakes reminded him of a world he had almost ignored. Maria returned to their booth to check on them. She knelt slightly to ask Ethan if everything was okay, her eyes warm and kind. Ethan responded with excitement, telling her that these were the best pancakes he had ever eaten. Richard noticed how patient and caring Maria was, listening to Ethan's enthusiastic chatter without rushing. She moved with grace, attending to multiple tables, yet still making time to focus on each person individually. Richard had never seen anything like this in the world of wealth and luxury. Here people worked hard, but they also cared genuinely for each other, and that fascinated him as they continued eating. Richard started to notice little details about the diner he had never appreciated before. The way the sunlight fell through the windows in the morning, casting patterns on the floor. The small vase, with fresh flowers on each table, carefully arranged. The old-fashioned coffee cups that felt sturdy and comforting in his hand. He began to understand that there was beauty in simplicity, something money could never buy. Ethan, meanwhile, had made a new little friend in Maria, and he was full of questions. "Why do you have to work so much?" he asked innocently. "Do you like working here?" Maria smiled, kneeling down again to answer him patiently. She explained that she worked hard because she wanted to take care of her family and that seeing children happy made her feel good. Ethan nodded seriously as if he understood the value of hard work. Even if it was different from his own life, Richard found himself listening more closely than he ever had before. He noticed how Ethan's face lit up with curiosity, how he asked questions about everything, from the syrup on the pancakes to the old jukebox in the corner. Richard realized that in his own life, he rarely stopped to ask questions, rarely stopped to truly see the world around him. He had been so focused on his career, on his status, on his wealth, that he had missed the small, beautiful moments that made life meaningful. By the time they finished breakfast, Richard felt a change stirring inside him. He had come to the diner expecting just a simple outing with his son, maybe a few moments of bonding. Instead, he found himself reflecting on his own life, noticing the differences between his world and the lives of people like Maria, and appreciating the joy and innocence of his son in a completely new way. Ethan held Richard's hand as they walked to the door, chattering happily about everything he had seen and experienced. Richard smiled, realizing that today was the start of something important. He didn't yet know how this visit would change him forever, but he felt a deep sense of awareness forming, a desire to connect more, to understand more, and to be present in ways he hadn't been before. As they stepped out into the morning sunlight, Richard looked back at the diner, the smell of coffee and pancakes still lingering in the air. He felt a strange mix of humility and gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about deals, contracts, or money. He was thinking about his son, about life, and about how ordinary moments could sometimes be extraordinary. He realized that this simple trip to a diner, something so ordinary, had opened a door inside him, a door to understanding, to connection, and perhaps even to a better version of himself. And all he could do now was step forward, ready to see what lessons the day had in store. The diner was bustling with its usual morning energy. The smell of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and warm bread filled the air. Richard and Ethan had just finished their pancakes. Richard was still quietly absorbing the new feelings that the visit had sparked in him. He noticed how the small, simple things, the chatter of regular customers, clatter of dishes, and the laughter of children created a comforting rhythm he had almost forgotten existed. It was in these ordinary moments that life felt honest and real. Ethan, curious as ever, was examining the space under their booth. He was always fascinated by little corners and hidden places, asking questions about everything. As he leaned down, he accidentally knocked his small toy car under the table. Richard bent slightly to help him, but Ethan was already giggling, pointing toward the waitress, Maria, who was moving between tables with calm efficiency. She noticed the toy under the table and, without hesitation, knelt down and crawled on the floor to pick it up. Richard froze for a moment. In his world, people in service roles were often hurried, distracted, or impersonal. Yet here was Maria, on her hands and knees, treating a small child's toy with utmost care and respect. Ethan's laughter filled the space, pure and unrestrained, as he thanked her and hugged her briefly. Richard watched silently, a mix of surprise and admiration stirring inside him. He had expected inconvenience or annoyance, maybe even a slight reprimand, but instead he saw patience, kindness, and genuine attention. The sight of Maria crawling on the floor struck a chord with Richard. He realized he had been living in a world where everything was about speed, efficiency, and results. Personal touches, acts of kindness, and patience were rare commodities. Seeing someone devote themselves fully to a small act without any reward or recognition was almost alien to him. He noticed how carefully she handled the toy, her fingers brushing away dust, her expression gentle. As if Ethan's happiness truly mattered to her, Ethan clapped his hands and bounced slightly in his seat, delighted by the interaction. "Thank you, Maria. You're the best," he exclaimed. Maria smiled warmly, standing up and brushing off her knees, but she didn't rush off to the next table. Instead, she knelt again, bringing herself to Ethan's level, and engaged him in a short, playful conversation about the toy. Richard felt something stir deep inside, a mixture of awe, guilt, and admiration. He had always assumed that the world ran on wealth and power. But here was a lesson in something far more important: care, attention, and heart. Richard found himself studying Maria in a way he had never studied anyone before. She was not young or glamorous, and her clothes were simple, functional for long hours of work. But there was a quiet strength in her movements, a dedication in her eyes, and a kindness in her smile that immediately captured his attention. Every gesture, from the way she wiped the table to how she checked on customers, showed a level of integrity and humanity that Richard had rarely encountered. He started asking himself questions he hadn't considered in years. What did her life look like outside this diner? What struggles did she face every day? How could someone work so hard, give so much attention to others, and still carry herself with dignity and warmth? These questions gnawed at him quietly, disrupting the confident, untouchable image he had built around himself. Ethan, meanwhile, was thrilled with the experience. He talked to Maria like they were old friends, asking her if she had children, what her favorite foods were, and if she liked pancakes as much as he did. Richard listened, noticing how patient and genuine Maria's responses were. She spoke softly, smiling often, and never once made Ethan feel like his questions were trivial. This was a stark contrast to the structured, fast-paced world Richard inhabited, where efficiency often took precedence over human connection. Richard realized that Ethan's joy came not from luxury or material possessions, but from attention, warmth, and the feeling of being seen. He began to reflect on his own parenting. How often had he been truly present for Ethan? How often had he prioritized work over small, meaningful moments? Watching his son interact freely, laugh without restraint, and feel cared for in such a simple environment made him confront uncomfortable truths about himself. He remembered the countless times he had tried to buy happiness for Ethan with toys, gadgets, or experiences, thinking that money could fill the gaps left by his absence. Yet here, in a simple diner, Ethan's happiness was effortless, spontaneous, and genuine. Richard felt a mix of humility and shame, realizing that the lessons his son was learning were far more important than anything he could purchased. As Maria continued her work, moving gracefully between tables, she noticed Richard's quiet observation. She didn't know he was a billionaire, and she treated him with the same respect and warmth she showed everyone else. Richard found himself admiring this quality even more. In his world, power and status often dictated how people treated him. But here, in this small diner, respect and kindness were earned through behavior, not wealth. A small incident caught Richard's attention again. A child at another table had spilled a glass of milk, and Maria immediately rushed over, carefully cleaning the mess without scolding the child. She reassured the child with gentle words, keeping the atmosphere light and comforting. Richard was struck by her ability to manage chaos with calmness and care. He realized that this patience, this dedication to others, was something he had never truly cultivated. He had always been focused on controlling outcomes and people, not on nurturing or understanding them. Richard felt a strange shift inside him. He had come to the diner to bond with Ethan, to experience a slice of ordinary life. But he was also learning a deeper lesson about humility, empathy, and human connection. He realized that life was not only about power and wealth, it was about small acts of kindness, about being present for others, and about valuing the dignity of every person. Ethan. unaware of the depth of his father's reflection, continued to engage Maria with endless questions and laughter. He admired her patience and kindness, seeing her as a friend and guide. Richard watched this dynamic unfold and felt a profound sense of gratitude. His son, innocent and curious, was teaching him lessons that no amount of money or power could provide. As breakfast ended, Maria returned to their table to clear the plates. She smiled at Ethan, who hugged her once more, thanking her for everything. Richard felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He realized that this simple act of crawling on the floor, retrieving a toy, and engaging with a child had sparked a change within him. It wasn't just about witnessing kindness. It was about recognizing the values he had overlooked in his own life. Richard silently made a promise to himself. He wanted to be more like Maria in this moment, not in terms of profession, but in terms of heart. He wanted to cultivate patience, empathy, and attentiveness, not only for Ethan, but for everyone around him. For the first time in a long time, he felt that wealth and success were meaningless without the ability to connect genuinely with others. As they left the diner, Richard noticed the small details he had missed before the sunlight streaming through the windows. The smiles of other diners, the way Maria moved gracefully between tables. Every element felt alive, meaningful, and grounding. He realized that ordinary moments, when observed and appreciated fully, could carry extraordinary lessons. Walking out hand in hand with Ethan, Richard felt a new awareness building inside him. Today had started as a simple breakfast outing, but it had turned into something much deeper. Watching his son and Maria interact, seeing the patience, care, and kindness in action, and observing the joy in his child's face, had opened his eyes to a world he had almost ignored. A world where love, attention, humility mattered far more than wealth and power. Richard knew that this moment would stay with him forever. The image of Maria, crawling on the floor with care and patience, and the laughter of his son, innocent and free, would become a touchstone for the kind of father and man he wanted to be. He understood that his life could no longer be defined solely by success and money. It had to be defined by the values he saw reflected in simple acts of kindness and genuine human connection. By the time they reached the car, Richard felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. He looked down at Ethan, who was chattering excitedly about the pancakes, the jukebox, and the toy, and realized that this day had changed him. He wasn't just witnessing his son's happiness. He was learning from it. For the first time, he saw life through Ethan's eyes, full of curiosity, joy, and an appreciation for small, meaningful moments as they drove away. Richard kept thinking about Maria in the diner. He knew that he wanted to carry this lesson forward, to be more present, more patient, and more compassionate. The world he lived in would continue to demand wealth, power, and status. But he now understood that these things were hollow without the ability to see, care for, and connect with others. And in that moment, he felt that life, in its simplest and most ordinary form, was offering him a chance to become a better man, a better father, and a better human being. Richard could not stop thinking about Maria and her quiet, strong presence. That simple act of crawling on the floor for Ethan had stayed in his mind. But now, as the day progressed, he began asking himself deeper questions about her life. He wanted to understand more, not just to satisfy curiosity, but because he sensed that knowing her story could teach him something important. The bustling diner, once a simple backdrop to a meal, had become a stage for lessons in patience, humility, and human dignity. And Richard felt compelled to learn as much as he could. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to strike up a conversation with Maria. "Can I ask you something?" he said cautiously, unsure how to begin. Maria looked up from wiping a table and smiled warmly. "Of course," she replied. Richard felt a strange nervousness. In his world, conversations often had stakes, deadlines, or intentions hidden underneath polite words. Here, however, he just wanted to listen. He asked her how she managed her life, balancing work, family, and everything else. Maria's answer was simple, honest, and unpretentious. She explained that she was raising her daughter on her own, working long hours at the diner, and sometimes picking up extra shifts at night. She spoke about struggles with bills, the worry of not being able to give her child everything she wanted, and the exhaustion that came with juggling multiple responsibilities. Yet, in her voice, Richard noticed pride and contentment. She loved her child, she loved her work, and despite the hardships, she approached life with patience and resilience. Richard listened intently. Realizing that he had never faced anything close to these struggles, his life had been carefully protected by wealth, privilege, and influence. Mistakes could often be fixed with money. Obstacles could be overcome with resources. But Maria had no such luxury. She faced every day with courage, determination, and a selflessness that amazed him. The contrast made him feel both admiration and discomfort. He had never considered how much character and inner strength truly mattered in life. Ethan, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, continued to chatter happily. Asking Maria questions and laughing at her playful responses, Richard watched them together, noticing the genuine bond that was forming. There were no pretenses, no social status influencing their interactions, just sincerity and care. For Richard, it was a revelation. He realized that his own attempts at teaching his son about the world had been superficial. He had focused on money, power, and status. But he had neglected the values that truly shaped a person: kindness, resilience, patience, and integrity. As the morning moved into afternoon, Richard's curiosity deepened. He asked Maria about her own childhood, her dreams, and her goals. She told him she had grown up in a modest home, learning from her parents the importance of hard work and honesty. She admitted that life had not always been easy, but the challenges had taught her lessons no money could buy. Richard felt a mix of awe and guilt. Here was someone who had lived a life full of real struggle, yet she carried herself with dignity and generosity. He had lived a life of abundance, and yet sometimes felt unfulfilled. Chasing achievements that never seemed to satisfy him, Richard also noticed how Maria treated every customer with the same level of respect, no matter who they were. A businessman who came in for a quick coffee received the same attention as a young couple with a crying baby. She did not judge. She did not hurry unnecessarily, and she did not look for praise. Richard realized that this simple attitude required strength and discipline. She had chosen to act with integrity, not for recognition or reward, because it was the right way to live. He began reflecting on his own life and his approach to business and family. He realized that while he had built an empire and achieved enormous success, he had often neglected the people closest to him. His son's happiness had been a secondary consideration. Filtered through the lens of his busy schedule and material provisions, Richard felt a deep, gnawing sense of regret. He had given Ethan wealth, opportunities, and experiences, but he had not given him the lessons that truly mattered: empathy, patience, and understanding the struggles of others. Richard also started noticing the small ways Maria balanced her responsibilities. She would take a moment to comfort a crying child, adjust a chair for an elderly customer, and still manage to keep track of every order in the bustling diner. Every gesture, no matter how small, was done with attention and care. Richard was struck by the thought that such consistency, kindness, and selflessness required not money or status, but true character. He realized that this was a kind of wealth far more enduring than the millions in his bank account. As he observed, he began asking himself difficult questions. Could he cultivate these qualities in himself? Could he teach his son to value empathy, patience, and integrity over wealth and privilege? He wanted to be a better father, a better human being, but he wasn't sure where to start. Watching Maria interact with Ethan provided an answer, though. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive lessons. It was about showing presence, care, and respect in small, consistent ways. Richard understood that every small act mattered, and that these moments could leave a lasting impact on his son. The afternoon went on, and Richard found himself thinking about his own childhood. He remembered the pressure to succeed, the constant focus on achievement, and the lack of attention to human connection. He realized that he had internalized the idea that success was defined by power, money, and status, not by relationships, empathy, or patience. Seeing Maria's life, he recognized that he had been chasing the wrong kind of fulfillment. True richness, he thought, came from love, care, In understanding the struggles of others, Richard decided to take a small but meaningful action. He asked Maria if she could share a little about what she needed most to make life easier. She mentioned a few simple things or sources for her daughter's education, help with medical bills, and sometimes just the knowledge that someone cared. Richard did not offer a grand donation immediately, but he made a quiet promise to himself. He would find ways to help that were thoughtful, meaningful, and respectful, not flashy or self-serving. He wanted to act in a way that honored Maria's dignity, not her situation. Watching Ethan interact with Maria also left a profound impression on Richard. He realized that children instinctively recognize authenticity and care. Ethan trusted Maria, valued her attention, and responded to her patience with joy. Richard understood that he had a unique opportunity to teach Ethan through example, not just through words or material gifts. By observing how he treated others, by showing empathy and humility, he could shape his son's character in ways far more meaningful than wealth ever could. As the day began to wind down, Richard felt a quiet transformation happening inside him. He was no longer just a billionaire observing ordinary life. He was a father learning what truly mattered. He saw that his son's happiness and development depended not on extravagance or privilege, but on attention, love, and the example he set. Maria, without even realizing it, had become a teacher. Her dedication, resilience, care had opened Richard's eyes to truths he had long ignored before leaving the diner. Richard spoke to Maria once more, asking her for advice on how to be a better parent. She laughed softly and said it was simple. Listen, be present, show love, and model the behavior you want to see. No lectures, no grand speeches, just consistent, caring actions. Richard felt a sense of relief and clarity. The path forward was not complicated, but it required humility, effort, and a willingness to change. Ethan held his father's hand as they walked to the car. Chatting excitedly about the pancakes, the jukebox, and the toys, Richard smiled, realizing that his son had been teaching him lessons all along, lessons about joy, curiosity, and the importance of human connection. He looked back at Maria, who waved goodbye with a warm smile, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Today had not been just a breakfast outing. It had been an awakening, a lesson in humility and empathy that would stay with him forever. Richard knew that this experience marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He would start to pay attention to the small acts, to value patience and integrity, and to guide his son not with wealth and privilege, but with presence, care, and example. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he understood what it meant to live a truly meaningful life. The image of Maria crawling on the floor for Ethan, her gentle smile and patient eyes, remained vivid in his mind. He realized that it wasn't just an act of service, it was a symbol of the values he had been missing in his own life. And as he drove away with Ethan, he promised himself that he would carry this lesson forward, changing not only his life, but also the way he raised his son. From that moment on, Richard understood that wealth and power were only tools. True richness came from humility, empathy, patience, and human connection. And in a small, ordinary diner, he had discovered a wealth that no money could ever buy. A wealth that would shape the rest of his life and forever change the way he saw the world. Richard could not stop thinking about the lessons he had quietly learned from Maria. Her patience, care, and quiet strength had awakened something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. That evening, after returning home, he found himself sitting alone in his study, staring at the city lights through the enormous windows of his penthouse. Everything around him, his wealth, his possessions, the world he had built, felt strangely empty. For the first time, he wanted something money couldn't buy: genuine connection, humility, and the ability to truly care for another human being. The next morning, Richard decided he had to act. He couldn't let the day at the diner remain just a fleeting memory. He wanted to take the lessons he had witnessed and put them into practice. He told Ethan they were going back to the diner not as a tourist passing through, but with the intention of making a meaningful connection. Ethan's face lit up with excitement. For him, the diner had been magical, and now, his father's attention to it made it even more special. When they arrived, Maria was busy tending to her usual tables. carrying plates and taking orders with calm efficiency. She did not know Richard's intentions or wealth. She treated everyone the same. Richard watched Ethan greet her with a joyful hug, and he felt a wave of warmth. Then he decided to step forward, to act in a way that would demonstrate the lessons he had internalized. He approached Maria quietly, careful not to overwhelm her, and asked if there was anything he could do to help make her life a little easier. Maria looked surprised, but smiled warmly. "We all manage," she said softly. Richard insisted gently, explaining that he had seen how hard she worked, and that he wanted to offer support not as charity, but as a gesture of respect and gratitude. Maria hesitated for a moment, then accepted his offer, though cautiously. She suggested something simple: a contribution toward her daughter's education and some help with supplies for the diner. Richard listened carefully, appreciating that she did not ask for more than what was truly needed. He admired her dignity and pride. She had never begged or demanded, only worked hard and cared as he handed over the support. Richard noticed the subtle way Maria's shoulders relaxed, her smile growing warmer. He realized that true generosity was not about showing off, but about acting thoughtfully, quietly, and with respect for the recipient. He wanted Ethan to witness this, to understand that helping others was not about status, but about compassion and care. He knelt down to Ethan's level and explained softly why they were doing this, showing him that even small actions, when done with sincerity, could make a big difference in someone's life. Ethan's eyes shone with understanding. He had always been curious and eager to help, but now he saw his father modeling empathy in a way that mattered. The simple act of helping Maria reinforced the lessons that breakfast had begun, that patience, humility, and human connection were far more valuable than toys, money, or prestige. Richard felt a sense of pride, not the pride of wealth, but the pride of doing something meaningful, something that aligned with the person he wanted to be, as they stayed longer at the diner. Richard continued observing Maria. He noticed the small, thoughtful ways she treated customers, adjusting chairs for comfort, listening attentively to complaints, or offering a kind word to children who were nervous or shy. He realized that these acts, repeated day after day, required immense discipline and heart. Maria had taught him, without knowing it, that true character showed in consistency, in the way one treated everyone with respect. Regardless of the rewards, Richard also began interacting with the other staff. He took time to speak with the assistant cook, the busboys, and even the regular customers. Unlike his usual interactions in business, he listened more than he spoke, asking questions about their lives and genuinely caring about their answers. He noticed the way people responded to his presence, not with fear or expectation in his world, but with appreciation and honesty. For the first time, Richard felt connected not through influence or wealth, but through respect, attention, and human warmth. Throughout the day, Ethan continued to play and talk with Maria, laughing and asking questions. Richard joined them, not as a boss or a wealthy visitor, but as a father and a learner. He found himself sitting on the floor at one point, helping Ethan clean up a small mess that had happened at the booth. It felt strange at first, humbling, but he realized that these small, ordinary actions carried enormous lessons about presence and humility. Ethan's laughter, pure and unrestrained, made Richard's heart swell. Richard noticed that Maria's life was far from easy. There were challenges she faced daily that required courage, patience, and adaptability. But instead of feeling pity, he felt admiration. He admired her strength, her ability to remain positive, and her dedication to her daughter and her work. Watching her navigate her life with dignity made him reflect on his own life and the choices he had made. He realized that despite his wealth, he had often avoided true challenges, focusing on controlling outcomes rather than cultivating character. As the day went on, Richard found himself drawn into small tasks at the diner. He helped clean tables, organize supplies, and even learned a few tricks from Maria about how to manage orders efficiently. He felt a joy he hadn't experienced in years, not from achievement or recognition, but from participating in real work alongside real people. He noticed that the world did not revolve around him here. Instead, he was part of a small community, contributing in meaningful ways. At one point, Maria took a brief break and sat with Richard and Ethan. She shared stories of her childhood, her dreams, and the ways she tried to balance work and parenting. Richard listened closely, realizing that life's real lessons came from resilience, integrity, and empathy, not money or influence. He asked thoughtful questions, wanting to understand how she maintained such grace and patience. Maria smiled and explained that it was about love, purpose, and the choice to be kind even when life was difficult. Richard felt deeply moved. He realized that he wanted to integrate these values into his own life. Starting with how he treated Ethan, he understood that teaching his son about life required more than words. It required modeling behavior, demonstrating empathy, humility, and care through everyday actions. He made a quiet vow to himself that he would prioritize presence over power, kindness over control, and genuine connection over wealth. By the afternoon, Richard noticed a subtle change in Ethan. His son seemed more confident, more aware, and more appreciative of the world around him. He had witnessed his father acting with thoughtfulness and respect, learning the importance of caring for others. Richard realized that parenting was not about providing everything, but about showing values through action. Ethan's laughter, curiosity, and empathy were blossoming because he had a living example to learn from his father. Before leaving the diner, Richard once again expressed his gratitude to Maria. He didn't offer grand gestures or gifts for show, but instead, he spoke from the heart, acknowledging her patience, care, and the lessons she had unwittingly taught him. Maria smiled, genuinely touched, and thanked him simply for noticing. Richard felt a quiet satisfaction that was unlike anything he had experienced before, a fulfillment that money could never provide. On the drive home, Richard reflected on the day. He realized that true success wasn't measured by the size of his wealth or the power he wielded, but by the strength of his character, the quality of his relationships, and the lessons he passed on to his son. He understood that acts of kindness, humility, and presence were transformative, not just for others, but for himself. Richard made a mental plan for the coming weeks. He wanted to spend more intentional time with Ethan, showing him how to care for others, to be humble, and how to act with integrity. He wanted to continue supporting Maria in ways that respected her dignity, not as a display of wealth, but as a genuine effort to help. Most importantly, he wanted to continue growing himself, learning from the ordinary people whose lives were rich in ways he had never valued before. By the time they reached home, Richard felt a sense of calm and purpose he hadn't known in years. He looked at Ethan, smiling and excited about the day, and felt a profound gratitude for the lessons he had learned. For the first time, he understood that wealth was secondary. Love, attention, empathy, and humility were the true measures of a meaningful life. That evening, as he watched Ethan play with his toys, Richard reflected on the small yet powerful transformations of the day. He realized that the diner, Maria, and his son had all contributed to a profound shift in his understanding of life. Small acts, simple gestures, and genuine connections held immense power. Richard knew that this turning point was just the beginning. He would carry these lessons forward, not just as fleeting thoughts, but as principles guiding his actions, relationships, and parenting. The image of Maria crawling on the floor, Ethan laughing freely, and the simple, warm environment of the diner stayed vividly in Richard's mind. He understood now that humility, empathy, and kindness could reshape not only his life, but also the life of his son. And in that realization, he felt a deep sense of hope and determination, ready to live differently, guided by values he had almost forgotten. Richard woke the next morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The lessons from the diner and from Maria's quiet strength were no longer abstract ideas. They were becoming a part of him. He looked at Ethan, who was brushing his teeth while humming happily, and felt a surge of love and responsibility. He realized that everything he had learned was not just for himself, but for shaping the life of his son. The day promised opportunities to put his newfound understanding into action. They began the day slowly, enjoying breakfast together at home. Richard did not check his phone or prepare for meetings as he usually did. Instead, he focused on Ethan, asking him about what he wanted to do and listening to his stories. The little things mattered, now listening without interruption, engaging with curiosity and showing patience. Ethan noticed the change immediately and responded with laughter, questions, and excitement that filled the apartment. Richard realized that this simple act of presence could have a more lasting impact than any gift or extravagant plan he could make. After breakfast, Richard decided they should return to the diner. This time, however, he wanted to contribute in a meaningful way beyond financial help. He asked Maria if they could spend the day assisting her with the diner's activities. Maria was hesitant at first, unsure if the billionaire father and his son would fit in, but she eventually agreed, recognizing the sincerity in Richard's request. She appreciated that he wanted to participate, not just observe. As they entered the diner, Richard felt a strange mix of humility and anticipation. He rolled up his sleeves, ready to work alongside Maria, Ethan, and the rest of the staff. The tasks were simple: clearing tables, restocking supplies, helping in the kitchen, but every small action required attention and care. Richard was used to delegating responsibilities to others, but now he found himself learning the value of contributing directly, of being present in the work itself. Each task reminded him that effort and dedication, even in small ways, had meaning and impact. Ethan eagerly joined in, excited to be part of the experience. He helped Maria organize utensils and plates, laughing as he mimicked the precise movements she used while arranging the tables. Richard watched his son, marveling at how much he had grown in awareness and appreciation. Ethan was beginning to understand what it meant to care for others, to take pride in helping, and to value hard work. Even in the smallest forms, Richard felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that these lessons would stay with Ethan for a lifetime. Throughout the day, Richard observed Maria's life closely. She moved with efficiency, patience, and a calm authority that kept the diner running smoothly. She dealt with challenges: a spilled drink, a demanding customer, a broken appliance, with grace and composure. Richard felt admiration deepening into respect. He realized that life's true tests were not about wealth, power, or status, but about character, resilience, and the ability to respond to difficulties with integrity. Richard also began to understand the subtle joys Maria experienced: the smiles of satisfied customers, the laughter of children, the sense of accomplishment at a well-prepared meal. All of these small moments brought her fulfillment. He realized that happiness did not come from luxury alone, but from meaningful work, from helping others, and from creating connections that mattered. Observing this made Richard reflect on his own life, where success often felt hollow despite the wealth and achievements he had accumulated. He noticed how Ethan observed and imitated Maria's example. Ethan was patient, attentive, and eager to assist, showing kindness to other children and customers alike. Richard felt pride, not pride of wealth or status, but pride of seeing his son internalize values that mattered: empathy, respect, and generosity. Richard understood that the best way to teach Ethan these lessons was through lived experience, not lectures or toys. The diner had become a classroom, and Maria, unwittingly, had been the teacher. During a quiet moment, Richard spoke to Maria privately, asking for advice on how to maintain these qualities in a busy life. Maria explained that the key was intentionality, to pause, observe, and act with thoughtfulness and care. She emphasized the importance of being consistent, showing respect in every interaction, and prioritizing human connection over convenience or efficiency. Richard absorbed her words. Realizing that they were simple yet profoundly transformative, Richard decided to take his lessons further. He offered to help improve certain aspects of the diner, not as a display of wealth, but as practical support. He suggested organizing supplies more efficiently, helping with menu planning, and even arranging for additional resources that could help Maria manage her work and her daughter's needs. Maria appreciated the thoughtfulness behind his efforts. Richard learned the importance of offering help in ways that preserved dignity, rather than through ostentation or charity. Ethan eagerly assisted, and the three of them worked together as a team. Richard found joy in this collaboration, seeing that meaningful contribution and teamwork created bonds that money could never replicate. He realized that connection empathy, and shared effort were far more rewarding than any material gain. The diner, once a simple backdrop for breakfast, had become a place of learning, growth, and transformation for both father and son. By the end of the day, Richard noticed a subtle but profound change in himself. He no longer viewed the world solely through the lens of wealth and power. He saw value in patience, humility, and the dignity of work. He understood that life's most important lessons often came from ordinary people who demonstrated extraordinary character. Maria's actions, small yet consistent, had reshaped his perspective on what it meant to live a meaningful life. Ethan, exhausted but happy, hugged Maria tightly before they left. Richard felt a surge of emotion. He realized that the experience had deepened not only his relationship with his son, but also his understanding of himself. He had learned that parenting was not about providing everything money could buy, but about modeling behavior, demonstrating care, and prioritizing presence and attention. The simple acts of kindness, patience, and humility he had witnessed and practiced were the foundations of a rich and meaningful life. As they drove home, Richard reflected on the changes he wanted to make. He would spend more time with Ethan, modeling empathy and patience in their daily interactions. He would seek opportunities to help others meaningfully, always with respect and humility. And he would continue to observe and learn from ordinary people whose lives embodied values far richer than wealth or power could ever provide. That evening, Richard prepared dinner with Ethan, taking time to engage in conversation, laughter, and shared tasks. For the first time in years, he felt fully present in the moment, unburdened by meetings, deals, or obligations. He realized that the simple joy of spending time with his son, teaching and learning together, was more fulfilling than anything money could offer. Ethan noticed the change too, responding with excitement, curiosity, and openness that warmed Richard's heart. Later, Richard took a moment alone to reflect on Maria's influence. Her resilience, care, and dignity had left an indelible mark on him. He understood that the lessons he had learned were not fleeting. They were principles to guide his life in parenting. He vowed to carry forward her example, integrating it into his daily actions, interactions, and decisions. The impact of this day, and the days at the diner before, would resonate for the rest of his life. Richard also realized that true connection and transformation required consistency. It wasn't enough to have one day of insight. He needed to live these lessons daily. He resolved to actively practice empathy, humility, and attentiveness, to teach Ethan through both words and example, and to value people for their character rather than their status. He felt a sense of purpose that transcended wealth or achievement, a purpose rooted in love, care, and meaningful relationships. The image of Maria crawling on the floor for Ethan, her patient smile and unwavering attention remained vivid in Richard's mind. It had been a small act, yet it carried a profound lesson about humanity, humility, and care. Richard understood that such acts, repeated consistently, had the power to shape lives including his own and his son's. That single moment had ignited a transformation that was still unfolding, guiding him toward becoming a better father, a more compassionate person, and a man who valued what truly mattered by the end of the week. Richard had begun implementing changes in his own life. He devoted more time to Ethan, engaging in activities that fostered learning, empathy, and joy. He reached out to Maria regularly, offering support in ways that were practical, respectful, and meaningful. He also reflected on his business and personal life, seeking opportunities to apply the same principles of care, humility, and attentiveness that he had learned at the diner. Richard realized that his world had expanded beyond wealth and power. He had discovered a richness in ordinary human connection, in small acts of kindness, and in meaningful presence. The lessons he had learned from Maria and his son were transforming his priorities, his behavior, and his understanding of life. For the first time, he felt fully alive, not as a billionaire, but as a father, a learner, and a human being capable of love, empathy, and meaningful change. From that day forward, Richard's life became richer in ways he had never imagined. Simple moments playing with Ethan, helping Maria, Listening, observing, and acting with care became the foundation of his daily existence. He had learned that transformation didn't require grand gestures or monumental achievements, but consistent, meaningful actions rooted in empathy, respect, and love. And in that understanding, Richard found a wealth far greater than anything he had ever known before.